At its peak, this shipyard stretches across 80 acres of reclaimed land on the eastern bank of Belfast Lough. 15,000 men pour through the gates every morning. Welding torches throw sparks against hulls the length of city blocks. The hammering of riveters is so loud you can hear it 3 miles away, and the ships that slide down these slipways are the largest moving objects ever built by human hands. This is Harland and Wolff, builder of the Titanic, builder of the Olympic, builder of over 1,700 vessels across more than a century of relentless production. At its wartime peak, 35,000 workers clock in here. 6 aircraft carriers, 2 cruisers, 131 warships, 22,000 vessels repaired. This single yard on Queen's Island, Belfast, is the most productive shipbuilding operation on the planet. Then the orders dry up. The workforce collapses. 35,000 becomes 15,000. 15,000 becomes 3,000. 3,000 becomes 300. The last ship slides out of Belfast in 2003. And where a city once built vessels that ruled every ocean on Earth, weeds push through the concrete. Office blocks rise where dry docks once thundered. A tourist museum charges admission to see the spot where the world's most famous ship was born. This isn't just about one shipyard in one city. This is about what happens when an empire mistakes its past for its future. When a name that once meant innovation becomes a monument to nostalgia. When the world moves on and you don't. Welcome inside the silent Harland and Wolff shipyard, where Britain's greatest industrial dynasty was built, crowned and buried. Edward James Harland is born on the 15th of May, 1831 in Scarborough, Yorkshire. His father is a doctor, but not just any doctor. William Harland is an amateur engineer who patents a steam-powered carriage in 1827, 4 years before his son arrives. The household hums with mechanical conversation. Guests include Robert Stephenson, son of the man who built the rocket locomotive, and Sir George Cayley, who constructs the world's first glider. Edward grows up surrounded by men who believe machines can reshape the world. He believes it too. At 15, he leaves for Newcastle, Robert Stephenson and Company. The apprenticeship is brutal. 6 in the morning until 8:15 at night. Saturdays until 4. He learns to build locomotives, not ships, but he learns something more important than any single trade. He learns precision. He learns that details are not decorations. They are the difference between a machine that works and one that kills. During those years in Newcastle, he meets a man named Gustav Christian Schwab, a Liverpool financier, heavily invested in the Bibby Line shipping company. Schwaber sees something in the young apprentice. He remembers the name. After Newcastle, Harland moves to Glasgow. J&G, Thomson Marine Engineers. He becomes head draftsman at 20 shillings a week, then back to Newcastle, this time as manager of the Thomas Todd Shipyard. He is 22 years old and already running an operation, but he is still working for other men, still building other men's visions. In December of 1854, Schwaber makes a suggestion. There is a struggling shipyard in Belfast, Queen's Island, a man-made spit of land dredged from the mudflats of the River Lagan just a decade earlier. The owner, Robert Hickson, is hemorrhaging money. The workers are undisciplined. The output is mediocre. Schwaber thinks Harland can fix it. Harland takes the job. He arrives in Belfast with a piece of chalk and an ivory ruler. He walks the yard, marking every mistake he sees. He cuts wages. He bans smoking, fire risk, and slacking eliminated in one policy. The men hate him. The quality improves. 4 years later, Hickson has had enough. He offers to sell the yard. £5,000. Schwabe provides the financing. On the 1st of November, 1858, Edward James Harland and Company is born. The new owner is 27 years old. He needs a partner, someone to mind the yard when he travels. Schwabe has a nephew, Gustav Wilhelm Wolff, born in Hamburg, trained in Manchester under the legendary toolmaker Joseph Whitworth. Wolff joins as Harland's assistant, and on the 1st of January 1862, the partnership is formalized. Harland and Wolff, the name that will build the Titanic, the name that will arm a nation through 2 world wars, the name that will define Belfast for a century. But in 1862, it is just 2 men, 1.5 acres of reclaimed mud, and 48 workers. The first contracts come from Bibby Line, 3 ships, Venetian, Sicilian, Syrian. Schwabe's investment is already paying dividends. The foundation is laid. Now Harland will build something no one has ever seen before. Edward Harland does not build ships the way other men build ships. He looks at the standard designs of the 1860s and sees waste. Wooden upper decks that rot, warp, and burn. Hulls with curved cross-sections that sacrifice cargo space for tradition. He asks a simple question: why? The answer is no reason. That is how it has always been done. Harland does not accept this. He replaces the wooden upper decks with iron. The ships become stronger. They become safer. They become fireproof where it matters most. Then he flattens the hull bottoms and squares the cross-sections. The elegant curves disappear. The cargo capacity increases dramatically. His ships look strange, long, narrow, flat-bottomed. Sailors call them Bibby's coffins, after the shipping line that orders them. The name is meant as mockery. It becomes a mark of respect. Harland's coffins carry more cargo, more safely, than anything else on the water. But the technical innovations are only half the story. The other half is the business model. Every other shipyard in Britain operates on fixed-price contracts. The builder quotes a sum, the client accepts, and if the builder runs over budget, the builder absorbs the loss. This creates a perverse incentive. Cut corners, use cheaper materials, rush the work, deliver something that floats and collect the check. Harland refuses. He proposes something radical. Cost plus. Harland and Wolff will build at actual cost, with a predetermined profit margin added on top. No fixed price, no incentive to cut corners. The builder and the client want the same thing. The best possible ship, delivered when it is ready. This requires trust. Absolute trust. The client must believe that Harland will not inflate costs. Harland must believe the client will not dispute legitimate expenses. It is a handshake that could be worth millions of pounds over decades. In 1869, Harland finds the client willing to shake hands. Thomas Henry Ismay has just purchased the White Star Line, a struggling operation previously focused on Australian routes. Ismay wants to pivot to the North Atlantic. He wants to compete with Cunard. He needs ships, and Gustav Schwabe, the same financier who backed Harland's purchase of the yard, makes the introduction. The deal is exclusive. Every White Star ship will be built at Belfast. No exceptions, no competitive bidding. Harland and Wolff becomes the construction arm of White Star's ambitions. The first vessel under this arrangement is RMS Oceanic, launched in 1870, hull number 73. She is a revelation. First-class cabins are moved amidships, where the motion of the sea is gentlest. electric bells in staterooms, running water. Oceanic is not just a ship, she is a statement. White Star will compete on comfort, not just speed. The orders multiply, the yard expands. By 1875, Harland Wolff operates 6 building berths and employs more than 1,000 workers. 2 new partners join the firm, Walter Henry Wilson and William James Pirrie, both former apprentices who have risen through the ranks. In 1880, the company opens its own engine works. Previously, Harland bought engines from outside suppliers. Now everything is built in-house: hulls, engines, interiors, complete vertical integration. No dependency, no excuses. Pirrie is the one to watch. Born in Quebec in 1847 to Irish parents, brought back to Belfast as an infant, he joins Harland Wolff as a gentleman apprentice at 15 in 1862. By 27, he is a partner. By his 40s, he is effectively running the operation. Gustav Wolff, never as hands-on as Harland, retreats into a supporting role. He will later joke that Sir Edward builds the ships, Mr. Pirrie makes the speeches, and as for himself, he smokes the cigars. Harland, meanwhile, drifts toward politics. He serves as mayor of Belfast in 1885 and 1886. In 1889, he wins election as Member of Parliament for North Belfast, running unopposed. He speaks on shipping matters. He collects honours. He steps back from the daily grind. On the 24th of December, 1895, Edward James Harland dies. He is 64 years old. He leaves behind a shipyard that covers 40 acres, employs over 10,000 men, and builds vessels for the most prestigious shipping line on earth. He also leaves behind William Pirrie, who has no intention of merely maintaining what Harland built. Pirrie wants to build something bigger, and he is about to get his chance. William Pirrie does not inherit Harland Wolff. He absorbs it. By the time Edward Harland dies in 1895, Pirrie has already been running the day-to-day operations for years. Gustav Wolff retires in 1906, content with his cigars and his dividends. Pirrie becomes chairman and sole master of Queen's Island. He is not merely a shipbuilder. He is a deal-maker who happens to build ships. He sits on the boards of shipping companies, steel suppliers, insurance firms. He understands that the real power in maritime commerce is not in the yards where hulls are riveted together. It is in the boardrooms where contracts are signed. Pirrie makes sure he is in every boardroom that matters. In 1902, he helps orchestrate one of the largest corporate consolidations in history. John Pierpont Morgan, the American financier, wants to dominate transatlantic shipping. Pirrie facilitates the creation of the International Mercantile Marine Company, a trust that swallows multiple shipping lines, including White Star. The sale delivers enormous sums to White Star's shareholders. More importantly for Pirrie, it guarantees that IMM's flagship line will continue ordering ships from Belfast. The exclusive relationship survives the change of ownership. Cunard, White Star's great rival, remains independent. The British government subsidizes Cunard to keep it out of Morgan's American hands. This sets up a competition that will define the next decade. In 1907, Cunard unveils its response to the Morgan threat. Lusitania and Mauretania, the fastest ocean liners ever built. They shatter speed records, they capture headlines, they make White Star look slow. Pirrie cannot let this stand. In July of 1907, he hosts a dinner at his townhouse in Belgravia, London. The guest is J. Bruce Ismay, chairman of White Star and son of the founder. Over the meal, they discuss strategy. White Star cannot match Cunard on speed. The engineering requirements would be prohibitive, and the coal consumption ruinous. But there is another way to compete. Size, luxury, ships so grand that passengers will choose comfort over haste. Peary proposes 3 vessels, the largest ever built. They will not be the fastest on the Atlantic, but they will be the most magnificent. Ismay agrees. The Olympic class is born. The scale is unprecedented. Harland and Wolff commissions Sir William Arrol and Company, the same firm that built the Forth Bridge, to construct a massive gantry over slipways 2 and 3. The Arrol gantry rises 840 feet long, 240 feet wide. It is a cathedral of steel scaffolding designed to shelter the construction of 2 giants simultaneously. Olympic's keel is laid in December 1908. Titanic's follows in March 1909. At peak construction, 15,000 men work at the yard. The chief designer is Alexander Carlyle, a veteran architect who has spent his entire career at Harland and Wolff. When Carlyle retires in 1910, his nephew by marriage takes over, Thomas Andrews, Peary's own nephew. The ships are a family affair. Olympic launches in October 1910. Titanic follows on the 31st of May, 1911, witnessed by over 100,000 spectators. No champagne. White Star does not christen its ships. The hull simply slides into the water and the crowd roars. The fitting out takes nearly another year. 3 million rivets, 882 feet of length, 46,000 gross register tons, capacity for over 3,000 souls. The cost is approximately £1.5 million, the equivalent of nearly 200 million today. On April 10th, 1912, Titanic departs Southampton on her maiden voyage. Peary is supposed to be aboard. He has recently undergone surgery and is too weak to travel. He sends Thomas Andrews in his place, carrying a notebook to record every observation, every refinement, every improvement that can be made for Britannic, the 3rd ship of the class. 5 days later, Titanic strikes an iceberg in the North Atlantic. She sinks in 2 hours and 40 minutes. Over 1,500 people die, including Thomas Andrews, last seen in the first-class smoking room, staring at a painting of Plymouth Harbour. A British inquiry absolves Harland and Wolff of all blame. Orders continue. Olympic is refitted and sails for another 2 decades. But the name Titanic will follow this shipyard forever. A monument and a warning, fused into the same 4 syllables. The sinking of Titanic does not slow Harland and Wolff. It barely registers as a commercial setback. Britannic, the 3rd Olympic-class liner, is already under construction. Her design incorporates the lessons of the disaster. Higher bulkheads, a double hull extending further up the sides, more lifeboats. She is supposed to be the perfected version of her doomed sister. She never carries a single paying passenger. When war erupts in 1914, Britannic is requisitioned as a hospital ship. In November 1916, she strikes a mine in the Aegean Sea and sinks in under an hour. 30 people die. The Olympic class is now 1 for 3, but Olympic herself soldiers on. She serves as a troop transport throughout the Great War, ferrying soldiers across the Atlantic under constant threat of German U-boats. She earns the nickname Old Reliable. She even rams and sinks a German submarine, U-103, in 1918, one of the few merchant vessels to sink an enemy warship. Harland and Wolff transforms into a war machine. The yard converts cargo ships into dummy battleships designed to confuse enemy reconnaissance. It reconditions submarines. It builds monitor ships for coastal bombardment. In 1917, it diversifies into aircraft manufacture, opening a factory on Queen's Island. Pirrie personally serves as Controller General of Merchant Shipbuilding for the British government, coordinating the replacement of vessels lost to U-boat attacks. His contribution earns him a viscountcy in 1921. Lord Pirrie of Belfast. The empire expands. In 1912, partly due to political instability in Ireland, Harland and Wolff acquires shipyards at Govan on the River Clyde in Glasgow. Additional facilities follow at Bootle near Liverpool, North Woolwich in London, and Southampton. The company also purchases a stake in David Colville and Sons, its primary steel supplier. Vertical integration extends beyond the yard. Harland and Wolff controls its own supply chain. Then Pirrie dies. On the 7th of June, 1924, aboard the liner Ebro, returning from a business trip to South America, Lord Pirrie suffers a fatal illness. He is 77. His body is brought home to Belfast on Olympic, a final voyage on the ship he helped create. The man who transformed Harland and Wolff from a successful shipyard into a global industrial empire is gone. His successor is Lord Kylsant, who buys back White Star from the American-controlled IMM in 1926 for approximately £7.9 million. Kylsant now controls both the shipping line and its exclusive builder. It should be a position of strength. It is not. The Great Depression arrives. Demand for new ships collapses. Orders evaporate. By the mid-1930s, Harland and Wolff is drowning in debt. In 1937, the company's creditors, Midland Bank and the Bank of Ireland, force a brutal refinancing. Shareholders' equity is slashed from £12.1 million to under £1.8 million. Government representatives take positions on the board. The world's most famous shipyard is effectively bankrupt. Rearmament saves it. Beginning in late 1938, as Europe lurches toward another war, orders for naval vessels begin flowing to Belfast. The Second World War completes the rescue. At peak wartime capacity, 35,000 workers clock in at Queen's Island. The yard produces 6 aircraft carriers, 2 cruisers, including HMS Belfast, which still floats on the Thames today as a museum ship, 131 other warships. It repairs over 22,000 vessels. The Belfast Blitz of April and May 1941 sees the Luftwaffe pound Queen's Island, destroying the aircraft factory and killing over 1,000 people across the city. Production continues. After the war, profits return. The late 1940s and early 1950s bring strong demand for civilian tonnage. Harland and Wolff diversifies into oil tankers and whalers. The last great ocean liners emerge from Belfast. MV Arlanza for Royal Mail Line in 1960, and the crown jewel SS Canberra for P&O, completed in 1961. Canberra is magnificent. Nearly 50,000 gross tons, capacity for over 2,000 passengers. She will serve for 3 decades, including a stint as a troop ship in the Falklands War. She is also the last liner ever completed at Harland and Wolff. The jet age is dawning. Passengers are choosing to cross the Atlantic in hours, not days. And on the other side of the world, Japanese shipyards are building vessels faster and cheaper than Belfast can match. The tide is turning. In the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, British shipyards produce more tonnage than the rest of the world combined. The competition has been bombed into rubble. Germany's yards are destroyed. Japan's are dismantled by American occupation authorities. Britain stands alone at the top. It does not last. By the late 1950s, Japan has rebuilt. Not just rebuilt, modernized. Japanese yards adopt American production techniques, welded construction instead of riveting, standardized designs that can be replicated efficiently. They build ships faster, they build them cheaper, and they deliver them on time. British yards do none of these things. The numbers tell the story. In the late 1940s, Britain controls over 40% of the global merchant shipbuilding market. By the mid-1960s, that share is collapsing. By the 1970s, it will be in single digits. An entire industry is being hollowed out in real time. Harland Wolff is not immune. The yard is regarded by many experts as one of the best equipped shipbuilding facilities in the world. In the mid-1960s, it undergoes a massive modernization program. The centerpiece is a new building dock, a graving dock large enough to construct vessels up to 1 million deadweight tons. Servicing this dock are 2 enormous gantry cranes built by Krupp of Germany. The first, Goliath, is completed in 1969. The second, Samson, follows in 1974. They rise 315 feet into the Belfast sky, painted bright yellow, visible from miles away. The yard is designed to build supertankers. The global demand for oil is exploding. Tankers that can carry hundreds of thousands of tons of crude from the Persian Gulf to Europe and America are the most valuable vessels on the market. The 1967 closure of the Suez Canal, blocked during the Six-Day War, makes supertankers even more essential. Ships that can go around the Cape of Good Hope with massive cargoes are worth fortunes. Harland Wolff should thrive in this environment. It does not. The classic British shipbuilding diseases infect the yard. Wages are high. Productivity is low. Labor relations are poisonous. Contracts are fixed price, and delivery dates slip constantly. Inflation between 1967 and 1971 exceeds 20%. Every month of delay devours profit margin. Harland Wolff loses money even with a full order book. The yard that invented the cost-plus model with White Star is now trapped in fixed-price agreements where every overrun comes out of its own pocket. Management responds with cuts. The in-house foundry is shuttered. Most building berths are closed. The workforce, which peaked at 35,000 during the war, is slashed to barely 9,000 by 1968. The woodworking department, which once crafted the luxurious interiors of ocean liners, is converted to manufacture prefabricated housing. The shipyard builds nearly 700 homes before that operation, too, is closed in 1969. It is not enough. Cumulative losses between 1964 and 1970 total £16.5 million. And then the troubles arrive. Belfast explodes into sectarian violence beginning in 1969. The shipyard has always been a Protestant stronghold, a closed shop where Catholic workers face discrimination and sometimes outright hostility. In 1970, at the height of early Troubles violence, 500 Catholic workers are expelled from the yard. The sectarian dimension transforms every business decision into a political crisis. Layoffs mean unemployment in communities already seething with tension. Closure is unthinkable. The British government cannot allow mass joblessness in a city tearing itself apart. The first government bailout comes in 1966, when Harland Wolff simply runs out of cash. By 1971, after years of mounting losses, and the impossibility of letting the yard fail, the British government purchases a controlling stake. Full nationalization follows in 1975. Approximately 10 to 15,000 workers remain on the payroll. Harland Wolff is deliberately kept separate from British shipbuilders, the entity that absorbs most other UK yards when the industry is nationalised in 1977. Northern Ireland's situation is too politically sensitive for standard treatment. The yard becomes a special case, managed with an eye toward social stability rather than commercial viability. In 1971, the Arrol gantry is demolished. The cathedral of steel and scaffolding under which Titanic and Olympic were built, the symbol of Belfast's golden age, is torn down to make way for the modern facilities. Nobody protests. The heritage value is not yet understood. The gantry becomes rubble, cleared away to make room for a future that will never arrive. Samson and Goliath stand in its place. They are engineering marvels. They are also monuments to a bet that is already failing. A bet that Belfast can compete in a global market where the rules have fundamentally changed. The government is now writing the checks. The workers still clock in. The cranes still turn. But the orders are not coming from shipping lines that chose Belfast because it was the best. They are coming because subsidies make the prices artificially competitive. The moment the subsidies stop, the logic collapses. Harland Wolff is no longer a shipyard. It is a jobs program, and jobs programs do not survive forever. Nationalization is supposed to be a rescue. It becomes a slow-motion funeral. The British government takes full control of Harland Wolff in 1975. The workforce stands at roughly 10 to 15,000, a fraction of the wartime peak, but still one of the largest industrial employers in Northern Ireland. The yard is equipped with some of the most modern facilities in Europe. The Samson and Goliath cranes can lift loads that would cripple lesser equipment. The building dock can accommodate ships of almost any size. On paper, Belfast should be competitive. In reality, Belfast is bleeding. Managing Director John Hopper is forced to resign when the company's net worth plunges to negative £32 million in 1974. The government spends more than a year searching for a replacement before promoting Ronald Punt, the production manager, to the top job. It is a bureaucratic response to a commercial catastrophe. Then the world changes again. In October 1973, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries declares an oil embargo against nations supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War. Oil prices quadruple almost overnight. The global economy lurches into recession, and the demand for supertankers, the product Belfast had spent a decade retooling to build, collapses. The logic is brutal. Expensive oil means conservation. Conservation means less crude being shipped. Less crude means fewer tankers needed. The yards that bet everything on supertankers are left holding contracts for ships that owners no longer want. Some British shipbuilders find themselves paying customers to cancel orders rather than completing vessels at a loss. Harland Wolff has built the infrastructure to construct million-ton tankers. The market for million-ton tankers has evaporated. The government does not let the yard close. It cannot. The political calculus is immovable. Northern Ireland is in the grip of the Troubles. The British Army patrols Belfast streets. Bombs explode in city centres. Paramilitary groups control neighbourhoods. Unemployment in this environment is not merely an economic problem. It is a recruitment tool for violence. Every man laid off from the shipyard is a man with grievances, a man with time, a man potentially available to organizations that thrive on despair. So the subsidies continue. Harland Wolff builds Suezmax oil tankers, smaller than the supertankers it was designed for, but still marketable. The government covers the losses. The yard completes contracts that commercial logic would have cancelled years earlier. The workforce shrinks gradually, managed decline rather than sudden collapse. By the mid to late 1980s, employment is down to approximately 3,000. The total cost is staggering. Estimates vary, but the British government pours at least several £100 million into Harland Wolff during the nationalised years. Some calculations, including the eventual cost of privatisation, place the figure well over £1 billion. The money keeps the gates open. It keeps families fed. It keeps Belfast from suffering the shock of mass industrial closure during its most violent decades. What the money does not do is make the shipyard viable. Japan builds ships cheaper. South Korea, emerging as an industrial power, builds them cheaper still. The fundamental problem, that global shipbuilding has migrated permanently to Asia, is not solved by subsidies. It is merely postponed. By the late 1980s, Margaret Thatcher's government has had enough. The Conservatives are committed to privatisation. State-owned industries are being sold across Britain. Steel, coal, telecommunications, airlines. Harland Wolff is put on the market. The sale is not simple. The yard is worth less than nothing on a purely commercial basis. Its liabilities exceed its assets. Its order book is thin. Its reputation is tarnished by decades of losses and late deliveries. Finding a buyer requires the government to absorb the accumulated debts and sweeten the deal with continued support. In 1989, Harland Wolff is sold to a management and employee buyout consortium backed by Fred Olsen, a Norwegian shipping magnate. The cost to the public purse is approximately £625 million in write-offs and restructuring. A new company emerges, Harland Wolff Holdings, plc. Fred Olsen promises a fresh start, private ownership, commercial discipline, a workforce of around 3,000, lean enough to compete. The cranes still stand. The name still carries weight. Olsen speaks of transformation, of new markets, of a shipyard reborn. The workers want to believe. They have spent a decade watching their industry shrink, their colleagues made redundant, their skills devalued. They have endured the troubles, the bombs, the daily reality of living in a city at war with itself. They deserve a future. What they get instead is Fred Olsen, and Fred Olsen is not interested in building ships. The Fred Olsen era begins with optimism, a Norwegian shipping magnate backing a management-employee consortium, workers buying shares in their own future. It sounds like renewal. It sounds like pride restored. It is none of these things. The commercial reality has not changed. Harland Wolff is still competing against Asian yards that build ships faster, cheaper, and at scales Belfast cannot match. The privatization does not alter the fundamental equation. It merely changes who signs the checks, and the checks keep coming from the same place. In the 11 years between privatization in 1989 and the year 2000, Harland Wolff receives £184 million in British taxpayers' money. This is on top of the $625 million it cost to privatize the firm in the first place. The government has sold the shipyard and continues to subsidize it. Private ownership with public funding. the worst of both worlds. The workforce shrinks relentlessly. From approximately 3,000 at privatization, the headcount falls year after year. By the early 2000s, barely 386 workers remain, fewer than when Edward Harland bought the yard in 1858. The skills that built Titanic are disappearing. The institutional knowledge accumulated over a century and a half is walking out the gates and not coming back. Orders are sporadic. The yard completes occasional contracts, but the pipeline is never full. The gaps between projects grow longer. The facilities that once hummed with the labor of tens of thousands fall quiet. And then, the real strategy becomes clear. In February 2001, Harland Wolff sells its property arm to Ivy Wood Properties for £41 million. Ivy Wood is another Fred Olsen subsidiary. The shipyard uses the proceeds to pay down debt in its shipbuilding division. This sounds prudent. It is actually the first step in a liquidation. A year later, the shipyard declares that 80 of its remaining acres are surplus to requirements. Land that once held building berths, fitting out basins, and engineering workshops is now available for redevelopment. The property potential of Queen's Island, rechristened the Titanic Quarter, becomes more valuable than any ship Harland Wolff could ever build. Fred Olsen and his subsidiaries position themselves to profit from real estate development on land that was effectively given to them by the British government to build ships. Local politicians begin to notice a redesignation of the yard's leases is required from shipbuilding to development for the property deals to proceed. The Northern Ireland Executive approves the redesignation as part of what is presented as a rescue plan. Fred Olsen subsidiaries commit to releasing £15 million to prop up Harland Wolff and retain a workforce of approximately 386. Local councillors lobby in favour. They believe they are saving the shipyard. They are not. After the deal closes, one councillor admits he feels misled. As far as I'm concerned, he says, Harland Wolff's future is as a land developer. In 1 year, I believe the shipyard will cease to exist. The workers share the suspicion. Decades later, one ex-welder puts it bluntly in an academic interview. He's seen 7 square miles of real estate, and they give him it for a song, and he run the place down. A former draftsman named Brian Lister adds his own assessment. You couldn't get Harland's to be as bad as it was unless you were trying. Whether the decline is intentional or merely convenient, the result is the same. Shipbuilding at Belfast is dying. The last ship is already under construction. In 2003, MV Anvil Point slides into Belfast Lough. She is a 22,000-ton military cargo vessel built for the Royal Fleet Auxiliary as part of a 6-ship contract. She is hull number 1742. 1742 vessels across 142 years, Venetian to Anvil Point, the arc of an empire traced in steel. There is no ceremony, no champagne, no crowds lining Queen's Road as there were when Titanic launched. Just a hull entering the water and a shipyard falling silent. After Anvil Point, the building dock is never used for construction again. Harland Wolff pivots to ship repair, offshore engineering, heavy fabrication. It is no longer a shipyard in any meaningful sense. It is a facility that occupies the site where a shipyard used to be. The physical erasure accelerates. Former shipyard buildings are demolished. The drawing offices where Titanic was designed still stand, protected by heritage listing. Most of the industrial infrastructure does not survive. Development plans show scale models of the future Titanic quarter. Apartments, offices, hotels, museums. Workers who see these models are alarmed. The Belfast Harbour Commissioners, according to one account, have to drape the models with cloths to hide what they are perceiving was going to happen. Harland Wolff is being wiped off the map of its own island. The cranes remain, Samson and Goliath, painted yellow, visible from across the city. They are listed structures now, protected, preserved. They will not be demolished, but they will not build ships either. They stand as monuments to what was, not tools for what could be. The workers who spent their lives beneath those cranes watch their history being packaged, redesigned, and sold back to them as heritage. The shipyard that built the Titanic is becoming a museum about the Titanic, and the museum does not need shipbuilders. After shipbuilding ends, the transformation accelerates. Harcourt Developments of Dublin, backed by billionaire financier Dermot Desmond, becomes the lead developer of Queen's Island. The 185-acre site is rebranded as the Titanic Quarter. The plan is audacious, Europe's largest waterfront regeneration project. Apartments, offices, hotels, film studios, a science park, and a centerpiece attraction that will turn Belfast's greatest tragedy into its greatest tourist draw. The centerpiece opens on the 31st of March, 2012, 100 years to the month after Titanic departed on her maiden voyage. Titanic Belfast costs £97 million. The building is clad in 3,000 silver aluminium shards, designed to echo the prows of ships. It holds the record for the largest single concrete pour in the island's history. 4,300 cubic meters for the foundations. The architecture is striking, angular, aggressive. It looks nothing like a shipyard and everything like a statement. In its first year, 807,000 visitors passed through the doors. By 2017, annual attendance reaches 841,000. Titanic Belfast becomes the #1 tourist attraction in Northern Ireland. It wins the world's leading tourist attraction award at the World Travel Awards in 2016. The building appears in travel magazines, on social media feeds, in the itineraries of cruise ships that dock in Belfast Harbour. The attraction tells the story of the ship. Interactive galleries recreate scenes from Belfast at the time of construction. Visitors ride miniature cars through a simulation of the shipyard, ascending past scale replicas of the hull, the rudder, the massive stern frame. Holographic displays depict the sinking. Audio recordings play the testimony of survivors. A memorial wall lists the names of the dead. What the museum does not tell is the story of the shipyard itself. The century-long arc from innovation to dominance to decline to death is compressed into background material. The decades of government subsidy, the strategic failures, the workforce that shrank from 35,000 to 300. These are not the subjects of interactive exhibits. They do not sell tickets. The Titanic story is a spectacle. The Harland and Wolff story is a warning. Tourism prefers the spectacle. Elsewhere in the quarter, the heritage is curated with similar selectivity. The old drawing offices, where Thomas Andrews and Alexander Carlyle sketched the blueprints for Titanic, Olympic, and Britannic, are converted into a boutique hotel. The Titanic Hotel Belfast opens in September 2017. Guests sleep beneath the same barrel-vaulted ceilings where naval architects worked 14-hour days. The function has changed completely. The aesthetics are preserved. The Thompson graving dock, where Titanic was fitted out in 1911 and 1912, becomes an open-air heritage site. The SS Nomadic, the last surviving White Star Line vessel, once a tender that ferried passengers to the great liners, is restored and moored nearby. HMS Caroline, a First World War cruiser, is berthed as a museum ship. The slipways where Titanic and Olympic were built simultaneously are paved over and marked with dark stone outlines showing where the hulls once rested. Tourists walk the length of those outlines. They stand at what would have been the bow. They photograph the cranes in the distance. They do not meet the workers who built ships on that ground for 140 years. Meanwhile, what remains of Harland and Wolff tries to survive in a different form. The company pivots to ship repair, offshore construction, and renewable energy. In late 2007, the Goliath crane is recommissioned after being mothballed since 2003. The work is not shipbuilding. It is wind turbine assembly. In 2008, Harland and Wolff assembles 60 Vestas turbines for the Robin Rig wind farm. That same year, the company completes the world's first commercial tidal stream turbine, installed at Strangford Lough in Northern Ireland. By 2011, roughly 75% of the company's revenue comes from offshore renewable energy. The yard has reinvented itself, but reinvention is not resurrection. The workforce is tiny, the revenue is modest. The name Harland and Wolff persists, but the industry it represents has fundamentally changed. The company that once employed 35,000 people building the largest ships on Earth now employs a few hundred assembling components for wind farms. In 2018, the parent company, now called Dolphin Drilling, formerly Fred Olsen Energy, puts Harland and Wolff up for sale. No buyer emerges. Dolphin Drilling itself files for bankruptcy in 2019, dragged down by the collapse of oil prices and a mountain of debt. Left without a parent, without a buyer, and without enough contracts to sustain operations, Harland and Wolff enters administration on the 5th of August, 2019. The workforce at that moment numbers 123 permanent employees. The workers refuse to leave. Union members from GMB and Unite occupy the site. For 9 weeks, they hold the gates. They demand nationalization. They demand that the government honor the legacy of Queen's Island. Shop steward Barry Reid becomes the public face of the struggle, speaking to cameras, rallying support, refusing to let the shipyard die quietly. The protest draws attention. Belfast City Council voices support. The Labour Party sends representatives. Trade unions across the United Kingdom and Ireland express solidarity. The occupation becomes a symbol of industrial decline, of working-class resistance, of a city that refuses to surrender its identity. On the 1st of October 2019, a buyer emerges. Infrastrata, a London-based energy company, purchases Harland and Wolff for £6 million. £6 million for the yard that built the Titanic. The workers return. The cranes stay standing. Infrastrata promises growth, hundreds of new jobs, a focus on energy infrastructure. The workforce cheers. But Infrastrata is a small firm with little shipbuilding experience. The bet it is making is enormous, and bets this large have a way of going wrong. Infrastrata does not think small. The company rebrands itself as Harland and Wolff Group Holdings in September 2021, adopting the name of its most famous acquisition as its corporate identity. Then it starts buying. In August 2020, Infrastrata purchases the dormant Appledore Shipyard in Devon for £7 million. Appledore has its own storied history, shipbuilding since the 1850s, but it closed in 2019 after failing to secure new contracts. Infrastrata promises revival. In February 2021, the company acquires 2 more yards in Scotland. Methyl and Arnish, formerly part of the Bifab fabrication business, are purchased for £850,000 combined. Both facilities specialize in offshore energy structures. Both have struggled for years. The ambition is now clear. Harland Wolff Group Holdings will operate 4 shipyards across the United Kingdom: Belfast, Appledore, Methyl, and Arnish. A multi-site industrial empire focused on defense, energy, and marine engineering. The company speaks of synergies, of complementary capabilities, of a revival of British shipbuilding sovereignty. In 2022, the centerpiece contract arrives. Harland Wolff joins Team Resolute, a consortium led by Navantia of Spain and including BMT, a British engineering consultancy. The consortium wins the contract to build 3 fleet solid support vessels for the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. These ships will transport ammunition, spare parts, and supplies to the Royal Navy's aircraft carriers. The contract is worth £1.6 billion. It includes £170 million in planned investment to modernise the Belfast yard. For the first time in decades, Harland Wolff has a major naval contract. The British government is betting on Belfast to help build the support fleet for its most advanced warships. It feels like vindication. It feels like the beginning of a new chapter. Small signs of life appear. In April 2023, the Belfast yard completes its first new vessel since MV Anvil Point 20 years earlier. She is a barge for Corey, a waste management company, the first of an order for 23 such craft. Not an ocean liner, not a warship, a barge. But it is something. It is proof that the yard can still deliver. The workforce grows. Apprenticeship programs are announced. The company speaks of rebuilding the skills base that atrophied over decades of decline. Harland Wolff is hiring again, but the financial foundations are rotting beneath the optimism. Infrastrata, now Harland Wolff Group Holdings, is burning through cash. The expansion has been funded largely by debt. High-interest loans accumulate. The company's balance sheet shows mounting losses across multiple business lines. Overdue payments to creditors pile up. The gap between ambition and resources grows wider every quarter. The company applies for a government loan guarantee of up to £200 million. The guarantee would allow Harland Wolff to refinance its debts on sustainable terms, replacing expensive private lending with cheaper government-backed facilities. The request goes to the new Labour government, which took power in July 2024. The government reviews the application. It examines the books. It calculates the risks. It says no. Without the guarantee, Harland Wolff cannot stabilize its finances. The debts are too large. The cash burn is too rapid. The path forward disappears. On the 16th of September, 2024, Harland Wolff Group Holdings announces that it is insolvent. The company will enter administration, the second time in 5 years that the Belfast yard has faced this fate. The 4 shipyard subsidiaries continue operating, at least temporarily, but the parent company is finished. Administrators from Teneo are appointed to manage the restructuring. Shareholders are warned they will receive nothing. Approximately 1,000 workers across the 4 sites face an uncertain future. The Fleet Solid Support contract, supposedly the foundation of the company's revival, hangs in the balance. The investment that was supposed to modernize Belfast has not materialized. The skills that were supposed to be rebuilt are once again at risk. The workers have seen this before. They know the pattern. Promises followed by collapse. Rescue followed by decline. Hope followed by redundancy notices. But this time, the ending is different. On the 19th of December, 2024, an announcement emerges. Navantia UK, the British subsidiary of Spain's state-owned shipbuilding company, the same Navantia that leads the Team Resolute consortium, has agreed to acquire all 4 Harland and Wolff yards. The purchase price is approximately £70 million. The deal includes commitments to maintain roughly 1,000 jobs across the sites. Workers' existing terms and conditions will be preserved. The transaction closes in January 2025. Harland and Wolff is now owned by a Spanish state enterprise. George Brash, a trade union representative, describes the mood among workers as relief. Shop steward Barry Reed calls it the day we prayed would come. But the GMB union sounds a note of caution. Without a steady drumbeat of work, a spokesman warns these yards will continue to struggle. The name survives. Harland and Wolff will continue to operate under Navantia's ownership. The cranes still stand. The Fleet Solid Support contract will proceed, with Belfast playing a key role. The immediate crisis has passed. But consider what has happened. The shipyard, founded by an English engineer and a German immigrant in 1861, the yard that built vessels for the White Star Line under an exclusive partnership, the yard that constructed Titanic, armed Britain through 2 world wars, and employed 35,000 workers at its peak. That shipyard is now owned by the Spanish government. British shipbuilding has retreated so far that the United Kingdom cannot build support vessels for its own navy without a Spanish-led consortium. The skills, the capacity, the institutional knowledge that once made Belfast the greatest shipyard on earth, these have eroded to the point where foreign state ownership is presented as a rescue, not a surrender. The workers are grateful. They should be. Their jobs are saved, at least for now. But gratitude and irony can coexist. Harland and Wolff still exists. The question is whether what exists is still Harland and Wolff, or merely a name on a Spanish balance sheet, attached to a memory that grows fainter every year. The cranes still rise over Belfast. Samson and Goliath, painted yellow, visible for miles, silent sentinels over an empire that is no longer an empire at all, stand at the edge of Queen's Island today and look east, across the water toward the Irish Sea. The twin gantry cranes, Samson and Goliath, still rise against the Belfast skyline. They have stood there since 1969 and 1974, respectively. Painted yellow, 315 feet tall, visible from almost anywhere in the city. For decades they lifted steel plates onto hulls that would cross every ocean on the planet. Now they lift nothing. They are listed structures, protected, preserved, not because they are useful, but because they are symbols. Symbols of something Belfast built and something Belfast lost. Walk south along Queen's Road. The old Harland and Wolff drawing offices, where Thomas Andrews and Alexander Carlyle sketched the blueprints for Titanic, Olympic, and Britannic, have been converted into a boutique hotel. Guests sleep in rooms where naval architects once bent over drafting tables 14 hours a day. The barrel-vaulted ceilings are the same. The function is completely different. Farther down the road, the Thompson graving dock, where Titanic was fitted out in 1911 and 1912, sits open and empty. tourists peer over the edge. They take photographs. They try to imagine a ship 882 feet long, sitting in that concrete basin, 3 million rivets holding her together, the largest movable object on Earth. The slipways, where Titanic and Olympic were built simultaneously, are now a public plaza. The outlines of the two hulls are marked in the ground with dark stone. You can walk the length of them. You can stand at what would have been the bow. You can look up and try to picture the Aral gantry that once towered above this spot, 840 feet long, 240 feet wide, a cathedral of steel and scaffolding. It was demolished in 1971. Nothing replaced it. The space is open sky now. And beside all of this stands Titanic Belfast, a £100 million visitor centre clad in 3,000 aluminium shards shaped to echo the prows of ships. It opened in 2012 on the centenary of the sinking. More than 800,000 people visited in its first year. They come from all over the world. They ride through a recreation of the shipyard in miniature cars. They watch holographic simulations of the construction. They buy souvenirs in the gift shop. The museum tells the story of a ship. It does not tell the story of a shipyard. It does not explain how a workforce of 35,000 was whittled down to nothing. It does not trace the decades of decline, the missed opportunities, the government interventions that delayed the inevitable but never reversed it. The museum celebrates the product. It does not mourn the producer. That silence is the real story of Harland and Wolff. Not the Titanic, not the iceberg, not the 1,500 lives lost in the North Atlantic on a cold April night in 1912. The deeper story is about what happened on dry land over 160 years in a city that staked its identity on an industry it could not hold. 3 lessons live inside that silence. The first is that excellence does not guarantee survival. Edward Harland built the most innovative shipyard of the 19th century. He replaced wooden decks with iron. He redesigned hull geometry to maximize cargo capacity. He pioneered a cost-plus model that aligned the builder's interests perfectly with the client's. William Pirrie transformed that foundation into the largest shipbuilding operation in the world, constructing vessels so technically advanced they redefined what was possible at sea. At every stage, from the 1860s through to the 1940s, Harland and Wolff was not merely competitive. It was dominant, and none of that dominance prevented the decline that followed. Quality is not a shield. It is a starting point. The moment you stop adapting, the quality of what you already do becomes irrelevant. The second lesson is that no amount of government money can substitute for a viable market position. Between nationalization in 1975 and privatization in 1989, and for years afterward, the British government poured hundreds of millions of pounds into Harland and Wolff. Some estimates place the total at well over £1 billion. That money kept the gates open. It kept workers on the payroll. It kept the cranes turning. What it did not do is create demand for ships that Belfast could build competitively. Japan, South Korea, and China could build them faster, cheaper, and at a scale Belfast could not match. The subsidies were a ventilator. They kept the patient breathing. They did not cure the disease. And when the money eventually slowed, the patient had not gotten any stronger. The fundamental problem, that global shipbuilding had moved permanently to Asia, had not changed. You cannot legislate relevance. You cannot subsidize your way out of obsolescence. The third lesson is that identity is not a business strategy. Belfast wrapped itself around Harland and Wolff the way Detroit wrapped itself around the automobile. The shipyard was not just an employer. It was a culture, a community, a source of pride that ran through generations of families. Fathers and sons and grandsons walked through the same gates, learned the same trades, built the same kinds of ships. That intergenerational bond created extraordinary institutional knowledge. It also created extraordinary institutional inertia. When the world changed, when jet aircraft replaced ocean liners, when Asian yards undercut European costs, when container ships demanded different configurations than Belfast was built to deliver, the emotional attachment to what Harland and Wolff had been made, it almost impossible to see clearly what Harland and Wolff needed to become. Nostalgia is comforting. It is also blinding. Edward Harland arrived in Belfast in 1854 as a 23-year-old manager of a failing shipyard on a man-made island in the River Lagan. He bought the yard for £5,000. He hired a German immigrant's nephew as his assistant. Together with a piece of chalk, an ivory ruler, and an obsession with precision, they built the most famous shipbuilding enterprise in human history. 149 years later, the last ship sailed out of that same yard, the MV Anvil Point, a 22,000-ton military cargo vessel. No crowds, no champagne, no fanfare, no headlines, just a hull slipping quietly into Belfast Lough, leaving behind 80 acres of silence and a century and a half of memory. The cranes still stand, Samson and Goliath, painted yellow, visible for miles. They are the last sentinels of an empire that built the unsinkable ship, armed a nation through 2 world wars, and then watched the tide go out and never come back. If you listen closely to that silence, you can hear it. Not just the ghost of rivets hammering against steel, not just the echo of 15,000 boots on Queen's Road at dawn, but a warning, a whisper that carries across every ocean Harland and Wolff's ships ever sailed. No empire is permanent, no reputation is self-sustaining, and no name, no matter how legendary, can survive the simple, devastating refusal to change. That's the story from Queen's Island, but it's not the only empire that mistook its name for its future. If stories like this one keep you thinking, subscribe, because the next one might be even closer to home.